Hello, everyone. My name is Nicole Corbett, and I am the head of the Popponesset Water Stewardship Alliance. I also run the water quality testing program for nutrient-based water quality testing for Popponesset Beach and run the water quality subcommittee for the Popponesset Beach Association. And today I'm going to be presenting a presentation that was given at the fall homeowners meeting for the Popponesset Beach Association. Due to the inclement weather caused by Hurricane Ian this weekend, we are unable to do a lot of the field work that's usually conducted. So I figured this would be a good opportunity to record that presentation. So without further ado. So this presentation is going to be focusing on the work done by the Popponesset Water Stewardship Alliance over the spring and summer months. So some highlights. We continued our water quality testing program. This is nutrient-based water quality testing that's conducted in collaboration with the Center for Coastal Studies. So we look for nutrient-based compounds in the water, particularly ones that have nitrogen and phosphorus base to them. So we look for concentrations of those types of compounds. We also look at concentrations of algal pigments. We look at turbidity, we look at temperature, salinity, and dissolved oxygen as well. We have been running this program since 2019 in response to concerns about inundations of macroalgae or seaweed that were occurring at Popponesset Beach. And we were concerned that potentially deteriorating health conditions in the coastal waters may be contributing or a contributing factor to some of these inundations. Over the last summer, we had an intern, KK Macy, who helped with our testing program during July and August, and I give her my thanks. We also have been collaborating with the Barnstable Clean Water Coalition to collect Dassy samples from beaches in Popponesset and Barnstable. Dassy is short for Dassy siphonia japonica, is an invasive red seaweed that has been spreading throughout the Northeast since 2009. And our goal by collecting these samples is to run an isotope analysis in collaboration with Stony Brook University in New York. We are going to dry out these samples at Woods Hole Oceanographic Institute and send them to Stony Brook, where they're going to analyze their tissues for isotopes of nitrogen and see what concentrations of the various nitrogen isotopes may be in these tissues. Nitrogen that comes from septic tanks or sewage has a very distinct isotope signature. And Stony Brook recently released a study where they found that Dassy proliferations in Long Island's waters may be attributed to increased carbon dioxide levels, as well as sewage-based nutrient-rich runoff. So we're going to compare our samples and what might be in the tissues of our samples to what they may be seeing in New York, to see if potentially septic tanks in this area may be a contributing factor to the proliferation of Dassy siphonia. Dassy siphonia seems to proliferate during the winter months as it's a cold tolerant species, but also we have large inundations of this seaweed in the late spring as well. We also continued our jellyfish stink kit program. This program began in the summer of 2021. This was in response to large blooms of stinging jellyfish that were in coastal Popponesset waters. We have two main stinging jellyfish in Popponesset. We have stinging moon jellies and Atlantic sea nettle. The stink kit program is made up, or the stink kits themselves are made up of components that were purchased out of a lab via the University of Hawaii, where they have been working to find the perfect mix of different medications and ingredients that could successfully treat jelly stings. And these kits are made of vinegar base, a cortisone cream, and a heat pack. And together, those compounds have been very effective, plus the heat pack, have been very effective at treating our jelly stings. This program was successful in 2021. It was successfully funded in 2022. And the jellyfish really didn't show up in the numbers that we had seen in the past. So one thing we're actually looking at with the lack of jellyfish is if the drought over the summer may have impacted local jellyfish populations. It may have actually stopped them from blooming to the extent that they had in the past. One theory that I have is that these jellyfish are emerging from local bays. So Popponesset Bay, Wacoit Bay, and the bays in Barnstable, for instance. And one thing they may need is a large plume of nutrients that are caused by runoff after extensive rainfall or lower salinity conditions. So lack of rainfall may have been an attributing factor, but I would need an extensive study over years to corroborate that theory. We also simultaneously funded a jellyfish study with the help of residents in Popponesset. The moon jellies that have been stinging people for the past decade or so. Usually a moon jellyfish is not a species that would be considered harmful to humans, but for some reason in Popponesset, these jellyfish, or the moon jellies in particular, are packing a powerful punch. They also seem to sting when you are not in direct contact with the jellyfish. So if you are about a foot away from the jellyfish, you start to feel some of the impacts of that jelly or the jelly stings. My theory is it's via the mucus that may be coming off these jellyfish. Our goal with this study was to collect the tissue samples of 24 moon jellyfish that were in Popponesset waters. And in collaboration with the Ocean Genome Legacy Project out of Northeastern University, we were going to have the DNA from the particular jellyfish we collected analyzed against the DNA of existing moon jellies that was already barcoded to see if jellyfish in Popponesset's waters may have a genetic mutation that allows them to deliver the stings that they are and makes them somewhat of a distinct type of moon jelly compared to a regular moon jellyfish. We weren't able to get all the samples we wanted to this summer just due to the lack of jellyfish that we were seeing. So our goal is to continue this study next summer as well. Additionally, we were conducting seaweed surveys at Popponesset. This is work we've been doing over the last year, but we were able to acquire a drone this year to really extend out that study, look at not only different species of seaweed that are in the coastal waters and look at the seasonality of these different species, but also map out areas offshore where we're seeing large growth of seaweed and then analyzing what's in these areas, these seaweed beds per se offshore, and grabbing samples from these beds and seeing what's growing down there, when it's growing, and get some idea of basically what is happening at the very base level of the ecosystem in Popponesset. So these are our interns from Barnstable Clean Water who were collecting Dasypsyphonia samples at Barnstable beaches. And one thing that we were noticing over the summer, Popponesset Beach wasn't as bad in terms of the amount of drift seaweed that was coming in compared to years before last year. Last year we had so much storm activity, we really weren't getting the seaweed accumulations. But this summer wasn't really that bad, but there were definitely some areas where we had higher seaweed accumulations than others, particularly as you were heading down the beach towards Popponesset Spit, so Starboard Lane, Bluff Ave were examples. But as we mentioned, Bluff Ave and Starboard did have their usual good amount of seaweed accumulation, especially in late July and August. And it was at Bluff Ave in particular that they had temporarily a spike in E. coli levels in the coastal waters, which almost resulted in a beach closure there. One thing we noted is that simultaneously with the spike in E. coli levels, the water temperatures were incredibly warm. They were in the mid-80s in some areas of the beach, and there was a large amount of drift seaweed, and particularly off Bluff Ave. Further down the coastline at Loop Beach, which is about 3 or 4 miles from Popponesset, there was an extensive amount of seaweed accumulation, particularly Dasypsyphonia. And this seaweed had a large decomposition event. Usually we have this decomposition event in Popponesset at Starboard Lane, when that seaweed sits there and then rots out and then turns the water that black tar color and it smells. Didn't really happen in Popponesset this year, but it happened basically up the coastline. At Loop Beach, they had a series of bacteria spikes, and this resulted in several beach closures. Bacteria levels at this beach were about 200 times the state limits during some of these bacteria spike events. Now, a few studies have come out, one study in particular out of Florida Atlantic University, which has shown that when you have large accumulations of drift seaweed hanging along a coastline, and likely in our event in collaboration or corroboration with that increased water temperatures that we were seeing over the summer months, you do end up with basically this breeding ground for harmful bacteria. And ironically, this article had come out in May out of Falmouth as a result of a presentation given by Dr. Dawn Anderson, who is the head of the Harmful Algal Bloom Lab at Woods Hole, and someone who has also collaborated with me extensively on the Popponesset seaweed issues. And in his presentation, Dr. Anderson notes that, in this article as well, notes that potential problems arise when algae die in blooms close to shore and bacteria proliferate in the decay. While not all of the microorganisms are toxic, the decay can cause issues that can damage or kill marine life and sometimes humans. Damaging blooms can cause pungent seaweed clusters that trap jellyfish and crabs and can hurt swimmers. And this is a problem that's not going to go away and is very likely going to get worse. So one thing that is something that scientists are looking at more extensively, and something that we can kind of keep tabs on in this area as well, is if you're having these increased drift algae and drift seaweed accumulations along your coastline, and you have these warming temperatures in the summer, are there instances where we're seeing large spike ups in bacteria? Because that's one thing that this could potentially lead to. Obviously, more studies in this area would be needed, though. Dr. Anderson citing the jellyfish and crab trapping as well. Historically, in Popponesset, when we've had large seaweed accumulations along the coastline, they've also been jellyfish traps, where a lot of the jellyfish that bloom in the coastal waters get trapped in the seaweed, pushed ashore, and as swimmers try to navigate into the water, they end up getting stung. So we know that that's definitely an issue. So in addition to, as we mentioned, keeping tabs on things from the sky with our drones, we also were keeping tabs on areas throughout Popponesset and looking at what seaweed is growing where, during what times of the year, photographing some seaweed beds that we were seeing with the drone offshore. So we dove down into some of these beds and got some photographs during different times during the summer and started to extensively catalog out the different seaweeds in different areas. So the left image is some sargassum and codium that was found off Bluff Ave, right out by the buoy. Outside the buoys off Sandy Beach, we were finding this species called Spiridia filamentosa. Spiridia is a species that was found in Wacoit starting around 2011 over at Wacoit Bay. It was a species that wasn't really in this area too much before that. And Wacoit Bay was attributing this species spread to warming ocean and coastal water temperatures in this area, as well as potentially some increased nutrient loading in the coastal waters. But this species seems to be becoming a more dominant one in this area that was historically a more subtropical / tropical water species. This is also a species that's problematic in the Florida Keys. The bottom right is a species of Gracilaria that was found in Popponesset Bay. This particular species of Gracilaria, we also looked at Popponesset Bay rather extensively this summer via boat with Barnstable Clean Water Coalition. And this particular species of Gracilaria is a species that's only found in bays that are so eutrophied or have such a high level of nutrient enrichment that nothing else can grow in there anymore. It's essentially what you call a dead bay. So this particular Gracilaria species was the only thing left at the back of Popponesset Bay as you head over by the bridge, and then on the side of the island, that's island side when you're bordering Popponesset itself with Popponesset Island. This species was proliferating in that area. On top of what we found were several feet of decomposition and decomposed seaweed on the seafloor. So this is an indicator that that bay is having some extensive nutrient issues, and basically some areas of that bay are just essentially environmentally dead. So between the work that we did in the sky with the drones and the work that we did on boat with the Barnstable Clean Water Coalition going around Popponesset Bay, as well as some independent work that I did just going up and down the coastline, taking photographs, we've been mapping out all these areas of interest, I call them. So areas on the coastline where we're seeing different types of seaweed, mapping out what we're seeing there right along the coastline, right offshore, starting to do some work in Popponesset Bay and going in there, take some benthic samples and samples around Popponesset Island to see what's growing in what areas, and if we can see how conditions are changing in these coastal waters. When ecosystems change and you start to have a shift in ecosystem, you're really going to start to see that change on the most basic primary producer level, which in the case of marine areas is going to be with the seaweeds. So seeing how seaweeds are shifting, what invasive species may be coming in, what species that weren't traditionally found in these waters are starting to proliferate, will give you a sense of really how this ecosystem is changing and if it's changing for the better or worse. What we found via our seaweed surveys this summer is that there are many invasive species of seaweed in our coastal waters. Many of them have made an appearance in the last decade. In addition to Dasyphonia, that Spiridia species I mentioned is not one that's typically found around here. And that's really starting to proliferate. But we also found several other species mixed into these piles that we dissected on the beach, things that we found offshore that were species that had just not been here, that are traditionally invasive species that really are not beneficial to the ecosystem as a whole. Mentioned many species that are in high abundance, as I said, like Spiridia, Dasyphonia, ulva, which is a green lettuce looking seaweed. We have many species of ulva now in the waters. These are indicators traditionally of more eutrophic or nutrient-rich coastal waters. And these are, when I say nutrient-rich, basically nutrients over-enriched. You're having too much of particular nutrients getting into the water. Also, there's more of a variety of nuisance species in the summer. So in the summer months, we're getting really big mixed bags of seaweed. We're getting all different species mixing in, especially along Nantucket Sound, a large abundance of different seaweeds. A lot of them are nuisance species that really don't have much ecological benefit compared to traditional native species. Dasyphonia, as the months get cooler, is going to become the more dominant species during the late fall, winter months, and then into the early spring. Popponesset Bay overall had a very low species of seaweed diversity. That Gracilaria species that I mentioned is the dominating species around Popponesset Island and is essentially an indicator that you have a bay that is extremely nutrient compromised. We can take steps to reduce our nutrient loading in our coastal waters, though. I use Popponesset Bay data here just to indicate some of the deteriorating conditions in Popponesset Bay. Popponesset Bay has been extensively studied by Dr. Brian Howes of the University of Massachusetts, Dartmouth, who has been conducting research on this bay for over 2 decades. And he noted that in several reports, but this report I'm citing is from the Cape Cod Commission using his research from 2017, and he's presenting on a new report in the coming days at the Mashpee Selectmen meeting. But he noted that 82% of the nitrogen or the nutrients getting into Popponesset Bay, mainly nitrogen-based, as nitrogen is the limiting nutrient in coastal waters that really causes a lot of the issues that you see. 82% was septic system based, 10% was fertilizer based, 7% was stormwater based, So from impervious surfaces runoff just from the surface, and 1% was from wastewater treatment facilities. Septic systems around Popponesset Bay and around Mashpee have really contributed to the decline of water, our coastal waters throughout Mashpee, and waters throughout the Cape. And I think we're really starting to see the impacts of that in Popponesset Bay in terms of now we have species in there that are just indicators that your bay is compromised. So this was just some images of our jellyfish sting kit program, shifting gears a little bit. The jellyfish on the right is the one that we are studying genetically. So that is our moon jelly. That is the stinging moon jelly. And our goal is to collect tissue samples from this moon jelly to, once again, analyze against that of a traditional moon jelly and see if there's any mutations that have made this a new type of moon jellyfish. And those are some images of our sting kits as well that were hung up through Popponesset Beach over the last summer. And because not a lot of the components of these were used, we'll likely have enough that hopefully can get us even through the next summer. And this is our final little project that we're working on during the winter months. All of these are images of myself with my family in Popponesset. My family has been in Popponesset since the late 1950s, and we have a lot of memories in Popponesset. It means a lot to us. So our little project over the winter is what is your Popponesset story? And basically we would like people, if they have a picture of Popponesset from back in the day or a picture more recently of something in Popponesset that has meaning to you, send us a picture with a little blurb. And if we have your permission, we'll put it on some of our social media pages and just to keep Popponesset alive during the winter months, because I know we're most lively and Popponesset is most, Popponesset's really a summertime destination for so many people, but you know, keeping the good memories alive during the winter and during the off season, I think is important. And finally, we are on social media and we have a website, so you can visit us at poppywater.org. Our website is getting a bit of a revamp, so we are rolling out more updates for that periodically. You can contact us at poppywateralliance@gmail.com if you have any questions or you'd like to participate in our Poppy Story campaign. And you can follow us on our social media pages. We are on Facebook, we are on Twitter, and we are on Instagram. So feel free to follow us. And I do want to give a shout out to Lydia Vidal, who did the beautiful artwork for the background, who has done all the artwork for the website and the jellyfish kits. And she is an amazing artist. And I give her the biggest praise and thanks for all the help that she gives. All right, and that is all. So I want to thank everyone for listening to this presentation, and stay well, and thank you very much.